Welcome once again to our State of the World event for 2025. In this panel discussion, we will discuss the problems, solutions, and possibilities of our time. The lecture just given to us by Risto Marjomaa on the State of the World today serves as our starting point for this discussion. With us tonight, we have Sirkka Heinonen, who is a pioneering Finnish futurist and one of Europe's foremost scholars of future studies. Heinonen is a professor emerita at the Finland Futures Research Center, FFRC, at the University of Turku and director of its Helsinki office. Her research explores sustainable development, societal transformation, and the futures of peace. And Sixten Korkman, who is a leading Finnish economist with a long career in public service and policy research. He has served as Director General at the Finnish Ministry of Finance, at the Economic and Financial Affairs Council of the European Union, and as Managing Director of both the Research Institute of the Finnish Economy, ETLA, and the Finnish Business and Policy Forum, EVA. And Johanna Vuorelma, who is a political theorist and researcher at the University of Helsinki. Vuorelma's work focuses on democracy, political narratives, and the role of the European Union in global politics. And Risto Marjomaa, who is a historian and university lecturer at the University of Helsinki, specializing in global history, conflicts, and colonial legacies. Marjomaa's research focuses on Africa and the Middle East, particularly on the roots of contemporary conflicts, imperialism, and religion in warfare.
Thank you everyone on my behalf as well for being here tonight. I would like to firstly thank you, Risto, for giving us such an interesting lecture, despite it being so late in the day. I'm Astrid Amin of the Project Planner at Global Visions, and I'll be the moderator of this part of the event. So, as we're short on time, we'll get right into the questions. So the first question is for all of you, and we would like to begin by giving you each a chance to reflect on Risto's lecture and say what issues from 2025 stand out most to you that you would like to discuss. Thank you. Who would like to start?
Can I start?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this panel and good evening to all of you. And thanks for this presentation by Risto. It was really breathtaking, compact cavalcade of global challenges, I would say. It strikes me so that there were like two major challenges, and I feel that they really are major challenges: climate change and its consequences, and on the other hand, conflicts, escalating war and conflicts in the world. But what I was missing, and what is your take on this AI? Because during this year, AI has made tremendous advances, and it may have an impact on both those climate change and conflict areas as well. But thank you very much. I think it was really enormous package of challenges, but at the same time we have to then start thinking how to solve the problems and address these challenges. Thank you.
Shall I comment on that?
You may comment and then
Okay.
Sixten can comment. Thank you.
The reason for omitting AI was basically the same reason why I have left climate change in such a small role before. I don't know how it's going to affect. From historian point of view, we look backwards and we look at the results of what has happened before, but there hasn't results anymore. Personally, I think it sounds pretty much like a very dangerous bubble. I see no way they will be able to regain the money invested, because that money would have to come away from something else. But it's simply an opinion. I'm not an economist. So far, there has not been no results. This is for future, perhaps next year.
Okay, Sixten, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I also think the presentation was very good in setting out the problems, and I guess we should then find the solutions, which is a little bit demanding, but the problems are there, and I was thinking, are there some common denomination in all of these problems? And one obviously there is, which is Donald Trump props up in all of these problems. I mean, if you have a environmental problem, I don't blame him for us having an environmental problem, but he could be blamed for the fact that he thinks it's a hoax, that that he's taken out United States from these meetings and the international cooperation, which would be so badly needed. And that's why China is now the leader of the league in environmental issues. And of course, there are also other issues where he figures prominently, including the war between Russia and Europe. I would agree a little bit that the AI is worth reflecting upon. Not only it may very well lead to a bubble now. It may constitute a bubble. That's true. But I do believe that AI will have important long-term consequences, and there will be some benefits, not necessarily for those companies which are now investing heavily in AI, but for all those companies around the world who are going to use the new technology that the AI is providing. So there is a lot of scope. I would have a slight quarrel with you. We talked about it already with regard to the United States. Tariffs are an interesting thing, and many people were thinking that Donald Trump is creating a big problem for himself by raising the taxes. But on the other hand, some people like, say, Paul Krugman, who got his Nobel Prize in economics as a trade theorist, has been saying all along that it will not lead to a crisis in the short term. It will lead to less efficiency in the longer term, because it will weaken the efficiency of the allocation of resources and create problems for companies, and it will lead, at least temporarily, to an increase in prices. And I think we're seeing those effects, and it's bad for the economy, but it's not dramatic. And it has been compensated for by this boom in AI, which keeps the American economy going for the time being. It will not solve the current account deficit, because as long as you have a huge budget deficit, then the counterpart of the budget deficit is the current account deficit, because domestic saving is not big enough to finance the budgetary deficit. And I would just note that the American economy, you may like it or not, but has been very dynamic, very efficient, having much higher rate of productivity growth than Europe. So I would say Donald Trump, yes, he's a big problem, and he can create chaos if things go badly, but I would be slightly more optimistic for the longer term development of the US economy than you were in your presentation.
Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I would like to thank my colleague at the University of Helsinki for an excellent recap of 2025. There were many of those themes that have now sort of been dominating 2025. Of course, when you only have an hour, you can't include everything. What we really saw is that there's the geopolitical change, but then also this ecological catastrophe in the making. You did not mention the loss of biodiversity, which is, of course, is something that is really threatening all of us, not only in the long term, but also in the short term. What I wanted to add to your summary is the domestic level, because we are seeing also lots of, perhaps you can say, sort of instability in domestic politics in sort of various parts of the world. We can see that there's political protests. We can see the younger generation is really rising up to challenge the status quo for sort of legitimate reasons in many countries. We can also see that, for example, if we look domestically, particular states, we can see that there's the regional development is very uneven. Also in this country, in Finland, we see that some regions are sort of left behind, and we can see lots of centralization in other regions, which means that there's a reaction against this development, and this is part of the reason that we are seeing these protests also in Europe. And therefore, also me as an international relations scholar, I often look at the sort of the level of structures and the level of sort of states, but then it often sort of the domestic dynamic almost like is fading away in if we only look at the world through that lens. So perhaps we can also talk about these sort of domestic developments in the panel.
Thank you, Johanna. Does anyone else want to comment?
I agree with everything you say.
Okay, thanks.
I just had 1 hour to take. I had to make cuts, but I agree with that.
Yes, Sirka.
Can I add a suggestion? Why to make not to make another recap of very positive advancements through the year 2025 next
It would
year?
be much shorter.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
I did
Only
actually.
5 minutes.
China.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Chinese
yeah.
environment.
Yeah,
it
was-
really is very impressive what they are doing.
Yeah, you're quite right.
But there's a book by Juho Saari, professor in social policy, who argues that actually the early part of 2020s has been the most successful period in Finnish history. So in that sense, we can also, if we look at statistics, various statistics actually show that we are living the best era of Finland's history, which is of course paradoxical because at the same time we are experiencing this era of polycrisis, sort of also several different overlapping crises in this country. So there are these sort of tensions that we can see in the current era, which makes it quite difficult to sort of interpret what is actually happening.
Yeah. Johanna is now referring to a book which has the title Hyviä uutisia Suomesta. I recommend that for Christmas. You would be happy for a few days. And it is a well-done book. It's
more optimistic. It is, absolutely. Yes.
and
That is one sort of a relevant picture that we shouldn't forget.
No, I'm happy to refer to that book because I believe that we have a lot of things to defend in Finland, that our socio-economic system, the Nordic model, as we call it, is a very successful one, and it's reflected in those figures and international comparisons, but now it's undermined and threatened by our public finance difficulties, and those should be dealt with in a way so that we don't destroy what we have achieved, which is a very well-functioning socio-economic model. But this is not really the topic for this day, in this discussion, perhaps.
Thank you. So you wanted to bring some positive news into the discussion already. That's a good sign.
Well, there is of course, being again the devil in the company. Partially, our well-being is the reason of other people's not well-being. It was part of this problem is the very high living standard of the Western world. So if Finland is doing well, it doesn't really necessarily mean that it will be better for the world in the future. We are not really dragging anybody anywhere. We might even be in their way.
So if everyone in the world was living like the Finns are living, we would need 4
Yes.
planets at least. So that tells something about the really unsustainable level of our way of living in Finland.
But I imagine Sirka will have a solution for that at the end of the discussion when we discuss future studies more. But the next question is actually for Johanna. This is something I've been thinking about a lot, just the idea of the European project and the EU. So the question is, despite its internal divisions and the pressures it faces, do you think the EU could still evolve into a stronger and more visionary actor in global politics? What would that require in terms of political will, unity, or rethinking Europe's role in the world?
Well, I have been very convinced by Professor Anu Bradford's thesis on the Brussels effect, which really tries to explain how much regulatory power the European Union has internationally. So the ability of the EU to influence the business environment globally is actually a lot higher than we often understand. We have this way of speaking. It's, it has become like a talking point, saying like, oh, we are so weak and we are so sort of lacking behind in the EU and in Europe. Well, when you look at it from this perspective, so if you look at the way in which other regions and other countries are adapting the sort of the EU regulations, you can see that actually there's a lot of sort of regulatory power there. So that's one aspect of it. There's now quite a negative way of speaking about regulations in the EU at the moment. If you go to Brussels, many are saying like, oh, there's so much regulation in the EU. It's a big problem. In some ways, you can say that yes, there might be too much regulation in sort of certain sectors, and then too little in some other areas. So of course there might be some sort of overkill in regulatory terms in some sectors. The argument goes that it's slowing the innovative potential of the EU, when there's you always kind of have to deal with this heavy amount of regulation. But then looking at it from the global scale and understanding how much we need to be able to regulate the markets, it's sort of it gives a different picture. Another area, I mean, when I was studying in the sort of early 2000s, there was a lot of these kind of discussions on normative power Europe. It was very trendy at the time, so it was one of the visions for the EU. Is just like, okay, we might not have the military power of the US, but we have this normative power, and it really refers to this ability to influence norms in the world. For the last couple of years, there's been, the term has not really been used because it's often seen as a failure. Like, okay, the Europe actually, or the European Union, turned out to be quite a hypocrite, like not following the norms that it was promoting in the near neighborhood and also so further away. That's a valid argument. But at the same time, if I now look at if you think of the kind of the triangle, you have the Chinese model, you have the US model, and then you have the European model, I would definitely say that there's a lot of potential within the EU to really sort of to represent an alternative to this authoritarian model of China, and then this the US model, which is at the moment, we can say that it's in quite a chaotic state. We don't really know what the norms are that are actually followed in the current leadership. So the EU is starting to show and seem like a true alternative to both of them. And especially if we talk about liberal democracy, many of us might be thinking like, okay, we can no longer even envision a liberal democratic future. I think we should, but we have to critically think, like, what does it mean? How can we confront the failures of liberal democracy? Can we renew liberal democracy? And I think the EU is the most credible actor to really represent liberal democratic values in the 2020s.
Thank you, Johanna. Who would like to comment? Risto.
I think there is I'm all in favor of liberal democracy, and I think it's the strength of European Union that it made out of democratic countries. But there is a structural contradiction there, because in a democratic system, you are supposed to drive the interests of your voters. And so in different European countries, in order to have a combination of goal, you would have to have goals which profit each of the European Union countries in the same measure, because otherwise some countries, the leaders of those countries will regard that our voters are not now supported in the same. And it's very hard in a system like European Union to find any commonality, because it's not true that all the European countries have similar interests. And the leaders are supposed to be protecting their own voters. So it's the same time, it's a strength and a weakness. I think strengths are more important than weaknesses, but there is this is, I think, the main reason why European Union has such a hard time in making any decisions.
But how does it differ from a state? If you think of the representatives of the state, are they all representing the interests of all citizens?
Yes, but they have the federal state as well. We don't. There is the president.
But the way you formulated that, I mean, there's the idea that if we have a state, we have a unified interest, which is never the case. So in that sense, we end up, if we say that we need to have a representative of the interests of all the people, we sort of always end up in the same place in a way, saying like, we can't achieve that. But of course, the democratic deficit within the EU is really a fundamental problem in the EU, sort of thinking about the EU future and thinking about the strength of the EU. So in that sense, it still hasn't been solved, and it's very difficult to solve.
But in the United States, you don't need the agreement of all 50 states to make the decision.
Yeah.
That's a great difference.
Exactly.
I think we are at the heart of the matter for many of the issues that we are talking about here now. The European Union is a union of national member states who retain by and large their national sovereignty. Not entirely, there is also some common policies, some supranational elements, but still the nation states dominate the picture, and the nation state is the strongest organization that the world has ever seen, and it has only become stronger in the past few years when nationalistic populism has taken over. And it does create difficulties. I was working for 10 years in Brussels as a civil servant of the European Union, and I could give one which I think is slightly funny example of what this leads to. When we had, under the Commissioner Mario Monti, there was a long several years negotiations to create a system for exchange of information with regard to taxation of companies, just in order to get some cooperation in terms, but rather modest, but still some cooperation. Then it came to the top meeting, the heads of state, to be approved at the level of the heads of state. And everybody had been in favor of it at the ministerial level, but then at the level of heads of states, the Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi said, he thinks this is a very good proposal, but first you need to raise the Italian milk quotas.
Yes.
Because they wanted bigger milk quotas in the negotiations, and because the member states were not willing to give the bigger milk quotas, the decision couldn't be taken until later, when in fact he got his milk quotas. But this is just an illustration that member states are pursuing their national interests because that they are in power as long as they have the support of the national voters. And I think this is a terrible problem, because we would need a better international cooperation within the European Union and more broadly, and this nationalism is making it extremely difficult. Nevertheless, I think that the European Union has been a great success. Some years ago, it got the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think it earned it because we have had no wars within Europe. So it has had significant valuable effects, but you have this problem. The way this could improve is if we end up in a very, very serious crisis, because it has been said many times, and it's true, that the European Union, the integration can be improved, deepened only through crisis. And that's true. And if we have seen already some positive effects, Brexit, increased support for the European Union, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have made the European Union much more popular than it used to be. So these are indicating that if indeed we are in deep trouble, then I think we might be able to change the system in the sense that we give a bigger scope for qualified majority decision making, because we must get rid of this that any country can have a veto. Look at what Viktor Orban is doing these days. I mean, it's making the European Union very, very weak. As has often been said, it's an economic giant, but it's a political dwarf. And the reason is the decision-making mechanism, and we would need a stronger federal element.
So I think we are talking about sort of a couple of different things here at the same time. So if we talk about these particular interests sort of coming into the picture, and even if you've been sort of negotiating and willing to do compromises, someone comes in and says, okay, we are actually demanding this and this in order to agree. This sounds very much like our national politics. Think of, we even have this iltalypsy, for example, as a term that is exactly this. In the previous government term, we had various cases where politicians and also citizens were getting frustrated that there's one political party coming in with their particular interests and at worst sort of sabotaging the whole process. So that particular dynamic, which is also very prevalent on the European level, is not specific to the EU. I mean, you have this sort of the conflict of interests happening on several different levels. What is the problematic part of the EU is, I mean, I would say there are two issues. There's exactly what Sixten, what you said about this, the decision-making mechanism, whether we are able to proceed when there's one conflicting voice. This is really problematic because this completely sort of, it can stop sort of any progress within the EU. So I would, it's very good that we are now moving in that direction, that there would be, majority decision making in several different areas. Of course, that's already in some areas, but just to extend it. So that's one thing. But then the second one is this democratic deficit, which is really another part of the problem. So if we think of the Commission, where's democracy there? And this has not been solved. We have the European Parliament. It's very good that we have it. We have, Finland, how many MPs there are. We can think of it as a very sort of minor representation, but nevertheless, okay, there's representation, but it is the bigger states that really dominate the agenda. But at least we can talk about democracy there. But in many other aspects within the EU, we can't even talk about democracy. And this is a problem because it really decreases the legitimacy of the EU in the eyes of the citizens. Look what happened in the UK. So, and it was not a new issue in the UK. We had there was another sort of Brexit vote in the UK in the 70s. At that time, it was a very tight call, but that time the pro-EU camp won. Now the 2016 vote was a different result. But this is really something that we don't have on a national level. This dynamic that it would be completely lacking democracy, the decision-making process, and especially those institutions that hold sort of extensive amount of power. So this is something that would have to be fixed, but how can you fix it in times of various crises and in times when we really need a strong EU? So it's such a big question, and then we might get like these headlines like we did today, which was quite a shocking headline about potential sort of corruptive elements in at the top level in the EU. I think you all read that the previous representative of EU foreign policy, Mogherini, was detained today, and there are allegations that there have been some misuse of. No, it's a very complicated process, but I mean these types of headlines are really. They are dynamite, you can say, when it comes to the EU legitimacy, and we've had the Qatar gates. There's been sort of number of these headlines that are really, really bad timing, because at this time we would really need sort of strong trust in the EU decision-making sort of mechanism and the ability to really make decisions.
Thank you, Johanna. Does anyone have anything else to comment?
Maybe I can comment. All these things that have been discussed here are very important, and I think we are approaching a turning point. I see these challenges and threats that are now falling on Europe's shoulder as a turning point, and a point where we should stop and think it as a learning lesson. What is the vision for Europe if Europe will become fragmented and we have a lot of talk getting rid of too strict regulations, etc. So it is now time to decide whether we want to keep those, because regulations actually they symbolize rules. We want to obey rules, because if there are rules that are obeyed, then we know there is transparency, there is truthfulness in activities. So we should look at the long-term perspective for Europe and somehow try to have a shared vision for Europe, and not to get rid of regulations, but instead defend rule-based order.
Thank you, Sirka. Well, let's move on to the next question, which is something I have been interested in, which is peace. And this question is for Sirka. So, as we have already discussed tonight, the conflicts, especially in Risto's lecture, and when we look at these headlines filled with conflict and division, what possible futures for peace do you still find plausible or even hopeful? If we imagine a more peace-oriented society, what kinds of cultural or societal changes do you think would be essential to bring it about?
Thank you for the question. It's very important, but very big and difficult to answer. I would like to say that there is too much talk about war. We have war and we can't close our eyes. But there is too little talk about peace. We should turn it around and talk more about peace. How can we have peace? And in future studies, we have an approach that we take concepts, whatever it's school, hospital, war, peace. We think about the concepts, how they have evolved through history, and what is the current perception of these concepts, and what may be in the future, the concept of war and concept of peace. But when you define peace, what it is, it's not just the absence of war. We could deconstruct the concept of peace. What does peace mean to you? There are several layers, of course. There is individual level peace and national level, global level peace. Johan Galtung defined that there are actually two major categories for peace. There is positive peace and then there is negative peace. Negative peace is a situation where there is no war, concrete war going on, but there is suffering and injustice in society. Positive peace is a broader concept where there is no war going on, And in addition, there is no structural conflict or war or injustice in society. So we should actually be more ambitious and try to take this peace very seriously and start discussing and debating how we can achieve peace, and not just negative peace, but of course it's the first step in Ukraine and Gaza. But thinking about these concepts and how they will evolve and how they will open up may bring these subjects closer to people and policymakers.
Thank you, Sirka. Risto, you may continue.
I have said this before, probably last year too. I think that the idea of complete world peace is impossibility because of structural reasons. If you are threatened by violence, you can only either submit or use violence yourself. It's called pacifist dilemma. If you are a pacifist, then being threatened by violence, you always must submit, and thus it pays to threaten you with violence. You can only answer that violence with violence. But on the other hand, there is no need for us to threaten each other if we are treated equally. I think inequality, and not only within a country, but especially internationally, this division to those who have everything and those who have nothing. As long as this kind of world continues, there cannot be peace, because the people who have nothing, they have nothing to lose either, and they will use violence trying to get something for them. It's not simply a question of morality. It's basically probably a question of materiality, of need to have sustenance for your life.
Yeah, I think this the notion of peace is. I agree that we should talk more about peace, but I have sort of a slight problem with talking about peace, because we don't talk about the quality of peace. For example, now many are sort of supporting the US-led peace plan for, if you want to call it that, for Ukraine, and that's a very unjust proposal, as we all know. I mean, it's a catastrophic proposal in so many ways for Ukraine. I mean, the loss of sovereignty, the showing Russia that these violent actions really pay off. So I would always want to add just peace. It has to be just, and that what we understand as a just outcome of a peace process, that really varies. I mean, we have different interpretations of it, different understandings, and it really depends on who you ask. And that's why I would always ask those people who are affected by the peace process. So not someone looking at it from outside and gazing towards whether it's Ukraine or some other conflict area. So they are the best experts in saying like what feels just. And unfortunately, often these peace processes, they don't end up in that state that people would really feel like, okay, this was a just outcome, which results in you can say these frozen, if it's not a frozen conflict, at least these frozen situations where it's decades and decades and decades of this sense of, you can get a sense of revenge or grievances, and this kind of feeling like you just can't move on because it's so wrong what happened and what was agreed upon. And in that sense, it's somehow, I remember there was, I think it's still sort of to some extent, many were avoiding the word peace in relation to Russia and Ukraine, because it felt like you all of a sudden assumed the vocabulary of the Russian administration. So peace became like a toxic word in that sense. And because we play a lot with words, and Russia is very good at playing this ironic game that I also wrote about in my book that came out this year on ironic language in international politics. One of the cases that I analyze in the book is Putin's administration, because they are, you Risto mentioned this the language game or the word game, the ironic game that Putin's regime is playing all the time, sort of not admitting what they are doing, using words in an ironic way, and having that setting or having sort of that context, its sort of language becomes almost obsolete. Like, it's very difficult to use language that we are used to using, because you have to be all the time aware of the game that is taking place. And that really ends up, it's sort of, we end up in a situation where you just, you are lacking words. And I think this is what happened with the word peace. Like, even peace activists were telling me, like, I can't use the word peace because it's somehow, it's co-opted by an authoritarian regime.
May I comment back to that?
Yes, you may, and then Sixten.
Language is very powerful tool and vehicle, but that is the very reason why I suggest that we should study in which sense, in which context, in which definition the word peace is used. And we have a lot of examples of, I would call it peace wash, if it's not really peace that you are trying to offer somewhere. But that is the very reason that every time, anywhere, peace is mentioned, it should be opened up so that it's clear to everybody whose peace, in which conditions, in which context, in which sense, in which definition it is being used.
Well, it's rather problematic if we don't even know what we mean by the word peace. So it's not a good starting point. But be that as it may, and I understand what you're saying, and you're right. But now we are talking about an extremely difficult problem. I can only refer to what I just said, the fact that the nation state is the most powerful organization in the world, and it is the organization to which citizens are attached, to which they have their solidarity and their identity, and it makes it extremely powerful. And unfortunately for national politicians, one of the ways to get popularity, to get the votes, to get into power, is to designate an enemy. So you often have the situation where national leaders are constructing a threat and an enemy, and that does not make this situation easier. I think what would be at least helpful would be to have a framework, some sort of agreement between, ideally, all countries in the world about some mechanisms, some institutions, some methods for dealing with issues, and in a way trying to spread correct information and get a sensible discussion. This has been proposed many times in history. I once read many years ago myself a book by William Penn, who was a British citizen. He published in 1693 a book, The Future Peace in Europe, and he created a very elegant structure for how you deal with this issue. Later, by the way, he created Pennsylvania in the United States, a very successful person. But anyway, he did so, and Immanuel Kant, of course, is famous for, in 1795, publishing a book on the eternal peace in the world. And again, he sketched, in a way, a framework within which you could have discussions, exchange of information, you could look for compromise. You would have to accept, in those instances anyway, some degree of supranational power, meaning that each country does not have a veto right, but there is some sort of majority decision making, because otherwise you will never be able to solve the problems. There were the 14 points by Woodrow Wilson in 1918, the Schuman Declaration in 1950 is an interesting example. There are lots of others which I don't mention, but I think that one step towards having a more structured discussion of the problematic issues would be to have a agreed upon framework, needless to say, the United Nations does exist, but it's powerless. And I think the United Nations would need to be reformed, in particular the Security Council. And there I think no doubt that the Global South and Asia should have much more of a say within that institution than is presently the case. That would help a little bit at least.
One of the issues today is that I don't think we remember the security dilemma that is very much at the core of, if you look at the kind of the history of analyzing conflict situations and how they escalate. Security dilemma refers to this dilemma where the attempt to increase your own security often ends up decreasing your security, because when you start, buying more arms and sort of preparing in order to secure your own state, the other states often they read it as an aggressive act, and there becomes this sort of a cycle of escalation. And what we now see in sort of today as we speak is precisely this escalation. And this is sort of justified by saying, like, we have to do this because we have to be prepared. And this is, of course, very understandable. But how to break this cycle? This is really one of the questions that we would really need sort of political leadership to understand the logic of how this happens. And for small states like Finland, we can ask, like, are there any options available? We now know that the state budget is we are making sort of dramatic increases in defense, very understandably, because of being neighbor to a very aggressive and authoritarian state. Are there alternatives to this? I would like to hear our politicians sort of, they don't need to have sort of the right answers, but at least to have some discussion on this. And in Sweden, there was a radio program on the security dilemma, and I thought, okay, this is really something that at least, it's the logic and the notion is understood and discussed. You can have philosophers participating, you can have historians, you can have political scientists, you can have military experts discussing the dilemma. Like, okay, now we are in the middle of this of this dilemma. Are there any ways out, and how has it been done previously in our near history? But I don't see any of this discussion taking place in Finland, and this is something that I'm sort of perhaps disappointed or a bit worried about, that there's only this sense of sort of inevitability and necessity, and somehow it's completely out of our hands. We are just in somehow sort of passively following what's happening, although we could have more sort of active agency in at least acknowledging these dilemmas.
Yes, Risto.
The problem with just peace is that, unfortunately, being morally on the right has very little to do with who is stronger in war. And thus, often it has been that to demand just peace means that there is no peace at all, because the other side is not going to bend because it's stronger. It's the stronger side which always decides the end results of the war. And even if the stronger side would happen to be morally on the right, it's very likely that at the end of the war it will also demand something which no longer is just to have revenge on its enemy who originally was unjust. It's very hard to find an example of just peace in world history anywhere. They usually end up in the winner crushing the defeated and making unjust demands on the defeated. Another just an interesting point, you mentioned Russia and the word peace. It has background. It comes from the Cold War era. The West was always using liberty in every slogan. It's always liberty, that and that. And Soviet Union was always using peace. It was liberty against peace in propaganda. And the Russians are now harking back into this Soviet idea of peace. Peace is a good word for autocratic rule because you can't use liberty. It doesn't really fit into your system. But peace is nice. Peace is always nice to anyone. So it's a good way to come into. And also during the Soviet era, you could even claim that the problem is the West. They want some abstract liberty. They don't want peace. So it's a strong word, even when it doesn't really have any concrete meaning.
Thank you, Risto. I think that some of the discussion is leading up to something you actually said earlier about inequality being the main reason why we can't have peace. So my final question is for Sixten. In a world now shaped by AI, environmental limits, and growing inequality, what kind of economic thinking do you believe could best support human well-being in the future? And are existing economic models equipped to face these challenges?
Again, not a very small question.
No.
But I say first inequality, and I would say that it would be very helpful if the economic developments were favorable, because if you have financial crises, if you have high unemployment, if you have an increasing degree of inequality, it does create an atmosphere which is certainly not good for political stability and peace. That's why in the 1930s, with the Great Depression, we ended up in the Second World War, and we have a little bit of similar elements in the air today because of the financial crisis that we have suffered from, because of the fact that inequality has become so huge in some countries. It has fed this kind of populism, which reflects the fact that certain groups of citizens feel that they have been left behind. Nobody cares about them. They don't have any reasonable prospects, and they get angry. And then they are fed by these messages through the social media telling them that it's all the fault of the immigrants or something, whatever those who are the cause of their problems. And that creates really great problems. Now, I'd say first that it's difficult to say what requirements you should be putting on the economic system, given that AI, for instance. I do believe that AI is of real significance, but nobody knows what it will lead to. I mean, I'm trying to read what the really experts on the topic would say. Some of the experts say that this will mean the end of humanity. It will really be a great catastrophe. Some experts say that this is a great blessing, which will make it possible to solve the environmental issues and living standards for everybody and whatnot. And hard for us to know. But I read recently also in, probably it was in the Financial Times or somewhere, that the great accountancy and consulting firms around the globe are planning to reduce their staff very considerably because they plan to use AI much more. So they don't need so much staff because AI will do a lot of the work. And I think it's just one example of something which I think will happen on a broad scale. And that means that we will get growth, higher productivity, but we will get jobless growth. So a lot of people, particularly who don't have the required skills, will be left out of it. And it will lead to an increased polarization between the high-skilled, well-paid, and those who barely find a job at all. If they find it in the services and get a lousy pay. So I think that looks rather problematic. So it could feed into the inequality, which is already a problem as it is. And that, of course, is not a problem only because, I mean, if some people get rich, you may think that's not such a huge problem, but when many people get poor, that really does create problems. The second thing is that when some people are very rich, super rich, and a lot of people are very, very poor. They don't live in the same world anymore. They don't understand each other anymore. And those who are super rich, they will use the power that they get with their money to steer politics. I mean, even Financial Times these days is writing that United States is not a democracy anymore. It's a plutocracy, meaning that it's money which steers. And there are research showing that in the United States, if the elite, those who are really rich, if they have an agenda which they want to be implemented, that will be implemented. They are indeed steering politics in the United States very powerfully. So I think all that looks terrible. But then, of course, you can correct for these things. Liberal democracy is indeed rightly admired for its capacity to correct its own errors. So I don't think it's impossible to imagine that people get angry at some stage and then they will implement policies which will take away plutocratic power and implement reforms which will make life better. And in fact, Europe is a different planet than the United States in these respects. We are not in such deep problems. I would say that what looks more difficult is the environmental issues, and I don't feel like now perhaps it would take quite a lot of time to in a way explain how you can deal with that issue. So we can continue it if you like, but I would say only that I always am confronted with these people who say that we need degrowth. I'm a little bit tired about it because I think that degrowth is not the right way to think about this for several reasons. But one simple reason is that we have seen that if you get into a recession, people get very unhappy and very angry and political stability is threatened. So it's a rather difficult road to go. But certainly we do need to have less consumption and production of material goods. We should do as John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of all times, already said soon 100 years ago. He said, we should spend more on culture, reading books, going to the theater. That doesn't spoil the climate. It doesn't affect negatively the environment. We would need a change in the way we are living. We would need shorter working hours. He said that he believed that when productivity has risen to the level where it is today, in fact, in the rich countries, we would be working at most 15 hours per week. Well, we have not come there for various reasons which will go with it. But in principle, you can use strong economic steering instruments, taxes, subsidies, these trading permits for issuing carbon dioxide, and you can use public goods. You can introduce basic income. There are a lot of things that you could do conceivably in that future, but it would of course require a heroic capacity to decision making, and to start with, it does require a very far-going international cooperation, because we will never solve this climate problem unless we get this cooperation. There could be a possibility if the European Union, China, and the United States agreed among themselves. They could put pressure on the rest of the world, but we don't have that coalition, which would be a minimum requirement for the time being because of Donald Trump and the United States. But anyway, a very demanding topic. I feel a little bit helpless to talk about it. So
But you mentioned this AI, and one of my worries about AI is that what happens to our knowledge and our information environment. There's this interesting cycle of knowledge in the research literature where you start from wisdom. This is really the orally sort of often used, it's embodied in particular people. So really the kind of the ancient type of the form of knowledge. Then you arrive at knowledge, which allows more sort of like a scientific culture. It it's more abstract. Then you go to information, which is more specific. It's often tailored to particular tasks. And the following state, it's what is referred to as outformation. So not information, but outformation. And I really like this term because I think we are now approaching this era of outformation, which means that it's completely taken out of the context. We don't know. I mean, information actually, if we go back to etymology, it means that it's knowledge forming inside of someone. So there's always the knower, someone who developed this knowledge, which is the piece of information. But outformation refers to that type of these pieces of information that can never be taken back to particular sources. They float around. They are very sort of suitable to social media, because you often get these pieces from here and there, and you can put them together. They are often in a visual format, and people can read them as this is knowledge. This is increasing my understanding of something. Now with AI, because if we think about the way in which AI, how you teach it with particular corpus. A lot of that corpus is actually from internet sources, and the more of AI content we have online, of course, the more of that is being sort of fed to our AI, these sort of machines. So it's sort of we are teaching AI with AI. Sort of created so-called sort of information that I would actually call outformation, which completely takes any of that sort of that credibility now that we still sort of can identify, completely takes that out from that context. And this happens so fast that we are sort of soon in that situation where, if you think of the new generations, we have still been taught with the kind of traditional method of taking, these actual sources, reading them through, understanding the context. But if you are mainly in digital platforms and using a lot of AI to sort of to learn, to develop your understanding, to increase your knowledge, I really wonder how that is gonna work. What will happen to that? And I'm thinking of my students when I look at the, if I look at the information given to me by these artificial intelligence sort of programs, I can identify the false information very quickly. I can see okay, that's crazy, that's ridiculous, that doesn't make sense. But for someone who doesn't have that ground knowledge, how are you able to identify those places? Okay, I can laugh about it, and it is often ridiculous because they are often completely sort of hallucinating. But if I did not have that, how would I be able to navigate in that information environment or outformation environment? And this is one of my worries in the kind of quite short term, because we are, going so, we are sort of, it's really accelerating the process, and thinking, the situation in 10 years, in 15 years. So this is one of my worries related to our information environment.
I think that there is an even more basic problem, without denying that, which is that two of the values that we inherited from the Enlightenment period, one of them was that we were respecting science, we were looking for the truth. We don't do that anymore. I mean, who cares about truth these days? So if there is not a respect for scientific truth, for the endeavor to achieve at a true picture of things, that's one problem. The second value, which I think has been reduced very much, is the respect for the dignity of the human being. I mean, that's not very popular today neither. But what you say is an illustration again of the the fact that new technology is a double-edged sword. It can create a lot of problems. But on the other hand, you could say we could use AI to help us in fact-checking. I mean, that is also something you can use the AI to. But what the possibility for infinite lying using on AI is indeed one of the things that we will somehow have to deal with in coming years. That's one of the reasons why some experts think that this will mean the end of humanity.
Risto, one comment.
Yeah, a short one. About inequality, being a pacifist myself, I have always had this problem with there being one equalizer in the world for inequality, and that's violence. Whenever societies become too much unequal, like the Russian Empire, there will be revolution, there will be violence. And it's this fear of violence which can kind of bring down the expectations of the rich people. And there are wealthy people who understand that, wealthy people who do not want to live in bunkers. But if your state, if your society is becoming more and more unequal, in the end there will be violence. There is no other solution to that. The poor people will rise up in violence. It has always happened in the end. It's always the end result of crossing a line. And what hopefully our rich people, the wealthy people, will understand that this is not the line they want to cross. They don't want to live in a society. Like in Brazil, the rich people have to move from one house to another using helicopters because they don't dare to go to the roads fearing that they will be kidnapped.
Thank you. This has been really interesting so far. Let's now focus on the future in more detail for the last part of the discussion. So looking ahead, what do you see as the most important actions or changes that need to happen if we are to build a better and more just world in the future? Are our current models and answers adequate, or do we need to come up with something totally new? Who would like to start? A big question once again.
Our futurist.
Birka?
I mean, you are the expert on this.
No, I'm not an expert. I'm just exploring future possibilities. In future studies, we don't predict the future or make any prophecies. We are opening up and looking for different futures. There is no one future, and future is not determined, and everyone can have an impact how the future will be shaped. What we are thinking today, presently, at the present day, will affect the future, how it will be evolving. And of course, collectively and globally, it's difficult to know. We can't know for sure, but we can explore possible futures and then decide what are preferred futures. But I would raise here still this AI question. Actually, it's related to this. I think AI is a Pandora's box. We really don't know when we open the lid, and the lid has already been opened. AI, and part of the problem is that AI is not a monolith. It's not just one thing. AI has at least 3 different stages. We are now at the stage of artificial narrow intelligence. It is already here among us in our mobile phones, cars, homes, offices, in the urban infrastructure. It is already here. But the critical thing is how it is evolving to the next stage. The transition towards artificial general intelligence is critical. It's not generative intelligence. There is a great confusion. Generative artificial intelligence is the same as artificial narrow intelligence. But Jerome Glenn, director of a global think tank called Millennium Project, he has proposed to UN and written a book about it that we need now regulations for this transition, how we are moving towards the stage where artificial intelligence becomes approaching human intelligence. And then there is further in the future superintelligence, but let's not go there yet. it's already serious enough, this transition. What we could do, we could try to regulate and manage that transition and use it, like Sixten said, there are many good uses that you can use it, but there is already at the moment also like military applications, etc. So it is at the same time used for many purposes. It's up to us to decide what is actually, it forces us to think what it means to be a human being. What is valuable in us humans, so that this artificial intelligence can't supersede us. So it's our brain and heart. So there is a possibility that we lose our brain capacity a lot if we are just letting everything. It's very easy to let AI do some things and not think anymore as much as we could. And on the other hand, heart, what are our values? There is a great alignment problem that experts in AI are thinking about. How about artificial intelligence if he or it chooses different values that humans have? So those kind of things concentrate our thinking, how we can protect human values and then try to manage this artificial intelligence transitioning to the next level. So those are my thoughts about this.
Risto, please.
I have a very short answer to your question. Actually, all we would need is to be good person. We would need to take care of each other. It doesn't really matter what the political system or is, the economic system or whatever. If we simply started to take care of each other, to care about everybody, we will solve all the problems. Basically, it's a very easy answer to all of our questions.
I would say that it's not actually that easy because if you look at research on political trust, for example, you can see that, the question, what comes first? Is it social trust, trust between people, this sort of interpersonal trust, or political trust, which is trust in institutions? It's like this chicken and egg type of research puzzle because it's very difficult to study actually social environments where there are so many different elements affecting each other. We know that there's a correlation between political and social trust. So when you have high level of political trust, you tend to also have high level of social trust. But what is the correlation? Is it that because when people care for each other, is it that as a result you also create stable and trusted political institutions, or is it the other way around? And it seems based on research that it's actually the other way around, that first come the stable political institutions and what follows is social trust. And we can see, for example, in the ex-socialist countries in Europe, what happened was that the social trust between people who did not know each other was actually very low. Also, political trust was very low because these administrations were, as we know, authoritarian and corrupt and so on. But what was sort of the high level of trust was only between sort of the very close family members. Even in many of those cases, you could see that, because there was this system of also reporting on your, you might even report, your own sister or mother or relative to the administration that they are betraying the state and so on. You could even have that kind of lack of trust within your very close relationships. But sort of if we only, because you said that it doesn't matter what the political system, what it looks like. So it actually does matter. So political institutions,
if we would, yes.
Political institutions, they facilitate this ability to care for each other and really trust each other, and they in that sense they are really important in facilitating these sort of positive developments. And in relation to this, I would say that we might actually need new institutions, because if we look at the political system that we are living in, has it really changed in the last 100 years? I mean, if we look at the social and political environment around us, I mean, it looks very different from 100 years ago. But the political institutions that are in place, they have not really changed. Okay, you might say that it's a positive thing, that there's some stability in the system. But when you look at the number of, for example, if we talk about Finland, the level of the number of people who vote in elections is actually quite low in relation to our sort of the usual reference group, much lower than in other Nordic countries. Also, people's citizens' sense of being able to impact the society is relatively low if we compare to other, for example, Western European countries. So although people have high trust in institutions, they have a low sense of actually being able to have any impact, which is called the Finnish paradox. It's very sort of a unique paradox, because normally they go hand in hand. If a strong sense of sort of high trust in institutions normally go hand in hand with so high sense of having this sort of being able to having the sense that I can make an impact. So I would say, I mean, one sort of good example of these new institutions that we need are the citizen assemblies that have wielded really nice, good results in different parts of Europe, sort of bringing people together to discuss. It can be very sort of decisive political issues, and you have had, for example, climate assembly in the UK. They've had these assemblies in Ireland, in many European countries, and I would say that this type of institution to really sort of strengthen our democratic participation, and at the same time giving people the sense of being able to participate politics and having an influence on politics, but also giving sort of new political ideas to our system, which is currently really lacking any new political ideas. So I would say that more resources into citizen assemblies in sort of not only in Europe but also internationally. That would be one solution.
There is actually a rather strong case to say that the happiest era in human existence was during the hunter-gatherer era. That was the time when we really could fix our social relations in these small groups, or familial groups, and it has been backsliding ever since. That's when we were happy.
Too sad. Well, I guess that if you're asking for a vision for the better world, then one is free to wish. Present
How
a wish.
could we get towards that vision now first?
Well, I'd say that I think we should all be in the world preferably humanists, in the sense of the American Humanist Association, which says roughly the following: that humanism is a philosophy which is informed by science, inspired by the arts, and motivated by compassion, focusing on enhancing the dignity of the human being within a socially and environmentally sustainable framework. I think it's pretty beautiful if we would all be humanists in that sense. We would all be kind to each other, as Risto was suggesting, and innovative, etc. I do believe that the political system matters, and that liberal democracy still has demonstrated itself to be the least bad system, in the sense that it is capable, under reasonable circumstances, of correcting its own mistakes. But of course it does require free press, it requires reliable information, media working and many other requirements. It's not an easy system, and unfortunately if you have a authoritarian regime, dictatorship or otherwise, it's very difficult to transit then to a democratic system. They get stuck in it, and then we get these problems. But I think that we have a lot of research demonstrating the reasonably positive effects of liberal democracy. One advantage is also liberal democracies normally don't start wars, at least not against other liberal democracies. I mean, the United States has certainly intervened in a way which we often find unacceptable, but that's a separate matter. Then I can only repeat what I said earlier, that the world is now, the globe is like a small village where we are all heavily dependent on each other. The interdependence is strong, and therefore we can't solve our problems without a much better, stronger international cooperation than we presently are capable to. And one of the very, very negative trends in recent decades is the fact that this nationalistic populism is getting stronger and stronger, which is hostile towards the kind of cooperation that we would need to solve the problems. The tragedy of this populism is that if you have bad economic developments, then populism gets a strong support for various reasons, which we could talk about. And then the economic development gets even worse. And so you get into a sort of spiral. So that's very, very unfortunate, and that's why it's indeed very difficult to end on the positive note that we would like. But I will quote Karl Popper, the philosopher, who said a little bit something like Risto said in the beginning, that you must be an optimist. It's an obligation because the world is open. I mean, you can always change it.
Any more thoughts on future visions?
Yes, one more thing. If I can wish, I would wish a world where everybody has his or her basic needs fulfilled, live in peaceful conditions. But in addition, a sense of meaningful is needed. I propose this kind of hypothetical meaning society concept. Each individual should have a sense of meaningfulness so that their lives matter, so that they have meaning even if they don't have work. In Finland, Lutheran work ethic is so that if you have a salary work, you feel you are meaningful. But everybody should have a sense of meaningfulness in our world.
But then the question is who creates this sense of meaning, and here we get to this like the basic fundamental sort of ideological question that many would say that we need a state who facilitates the kind of meaningful spaces and the ability to have meaning in your life. But then others would say that it is the absence of state. So state has to leave us alone so we can do what is meaningful. And here I think you can argue for both these kind of ideological positions. You can have arguments for and against, but in that sense, I think the kind of the lack of meaning that many identify as one of the problems in our current era is, I would say, is very difficult to solve because there are so many forces that are sort of operating at the same time, somehow taking away this sense of meaning.
Yes, and if I may add here, this kind of sense of meaningful, I'm not meaning it in the sense of self-serving meaningfulness, but like this is related to what Risto said earlier, helping others, caring for others could be really meaningful for a person.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this discussion. We now have a little bit of time for some audience questions, if you would like to begin over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Jope Lehtonen. I teach history and social studies in the Otaniemi Upper Secondary School. And yeah, it's as I said, it's the environmental crisis. It's because we overconsume resources, and I love the idea that we should actually overconsume culture and not these materialistic things. Yeah, but it's But do you have a sense or any this kind of weak things that there would be this kind of a change of wind of change, this kind of direction? I personally is not very hopeful because, for example, Greta Thunberg has 17 million followers in Instagram, but Khloe Kardashian has 300 million. But say something good that I could actually bring this message to my students. Everything is going good anyway.
Well, one positive sign is that if you ask people, for example, in Finland, I mean, if you look at the data that asking whether people are willing or sort of whether they are demanding more ambition in climate and environmental policies, the majority are saying yes. They want more action. They want more ambitious policies. So in that sense, you can say that we need more democracy if we want to solve the climate and environmental crisis. So the problem, I mean, we often many tend to think that the problem is the people who do not want to give up their lifestyle and their sort of their status and all this what they are able to consume, but that does not seem to be the case. Many are actually willing to move in the direction of kind of more regulation, more ambitious policies. So the problem is more in the political leadership, that they just need to hear and listen to the people more carefully.
I would be much more pessimistic because, I mean, if people really felt strongly that this is something we should give priority and do, then they would vote such politicians into power who would implement those things, and they are not doing it. And I think that, again, we have this problem that whenever there are bad economic developments, then people start to feel priority for something else. If you go to the United States, what they want is, they talk about affordability today. They think that their real earnings have not grown according to the expectations as they should do. And they don't give a, no, I don't say they don't give a damn for the environment, but they don't attach the importance to the environment which we would hope they would do. And therefore, I must say that I don't think that we will have serious progress before we are in a much deeper crisis. Then it will come. I think at some stage, yes, the political system will have to react, but we are not there yet.
Our brains have been built to face existential crisis, immediate crisis. We are very good at this. We are probably the best in this planet to solve existential crisis, a danger right ahead of us. But we are not very good in holistic thinking for the future. It's probably in our species. It's something we can't help. And I have been waiting, similarly, kind of existential crisis from environment and hoping that that would push people into acting. We are very good in acting when this kind of crisis happens. But on the other hand, I was hoping that the Katrina, what's it called? It's not a hurricane there. The storm, Katrina storm, which destroyed the New Orleans, city of New Orleans in 2004, would have been enough, and it wasn't. It's 20 years since. So, but still, there is the possibility still that there is something which is staring us at our faces, and then we will act. We can act. We are free spirits in that, and we are very good in solving problems. We have survived so far in this planet.
But the problem is the kind of the tipping points that
Yes.
if we, because now we talk about as if we can, reverse
that's the
something that
problem.
has already happened, because this is the case with economic crises, this is the case with political crises. These are man-made crises, so we can always take a different route. This is not the case with if we have the Atlantic, the circulation is changing. I mean, this will have catastrophic consequences for Northern Europe, including Finland, and we can't then say like, okay, now we can act, now we can reverse that process, because I mean, once the tipping point is reached, there's it's completely unpredictable consequences, and then it's too late. And in that sense, the kind of the narrative of like waiting until and then we can fix it doesn't work with climate crises. It works with most of the other crises that we are witnessing, but unfortunately not with this one.
The simple logic is that we are not going to act, because we are talking about the global externality, meaning that it doesn't matter where the emissions of carbon dioxide are taking place. They will affect the whole globe precisely in the same manner. And therefore, everybody wants to be a free rider. Nobody wants to take upon himself the cost of doing it. You can say, if you go to the parliament in Finland and say, we should do more, then somebody will say, I can tell you from which party. It doesn't matter. It's peanuts. Whatever we do, it doesn't matter for the global warming. And that's true, unfortunately. That's why I repeat that the only way to deal with this would be a global framework for which I don't see the preconditions be in existence. And therefore, the only forecast you can make is that we are going towards the catastrophes. There are tipping points, even worse. But anyway, it will not be solved
But I'll interrupt you quickly to say that what our guest that we have often here, Heikki Palomäki, always talks about the coalition of the willing, who have been able to get things done in the past. So we only need to have, we probably will have this big threat, but then if we can get the coalition of the willing together, then something will happen in that sense, which maybe see a new institution, is it a tax framework or whatever. So there is some hope. I'm just saying. But Sirkka, if you could say the final thing.
Yes, I might add here, of course, it's a human characteristic that we learn through crises. I wish we learned before crisis. We would do that if we had a shorter time, a longer time horizon, and these kind of tipping points and catastrophes are shown to us beforehand. But I have one solution. I believe also in the power of examples. So I think nowadays we only have these risks and threats, risks and catastrophes shown to us. We should have more example visible that is already being done. There are pioneers in Finland and globally who are doing a lot of fantastic work, but they are not like news in the media. So these kind of examples of good practices, good inventions, it could be even from agriculture or whichever sector in society, but good examples of sustainable practices. We need more of them to become visible.
Any other questions?
I'm Päivi Kärntalberg, and I work in the environmental engineering. Thank you for the interesting presentation, Risto Marjamaa, and the good discussion that you've been having so far. In the beginning of the discussion, there was some rather pessimistic point of view, but I have a question pointing out to the more positive direction, and also referring to those previous questions. What could an individual do in order to the world be a better place in, now that we talked about 25, than in the year 2026?
Risto.
Individual. That's something I have been asked when I teach in school. I'm sometimes visiting lecturer in school, usually about our modern times. Eat less red meat. That's very simple. I have been told that much of these problems would be solved if we would have same kind of we would eat in the same way as we did when I was young in 1970s. That is the great increase of eating meat, especially red meat, ever since 1990s, has partially caused much of the problems because so much agricultural land is now taken on pastures on cattle. So if you are in an individual level, just for one person, I would say that eat less red meat. You don't have to give it up. Once a week would be enough. But even that would actually solve very many problems.
I think that's a good suggestion. I think each of us should try to behave environmentally in a better way. I don't think it will solve the problem because I'm afraid that the other people in the world are not going to follow the example, but at least it gives me a better conscience.
Yes.
So I think that mentally I will live a life which is more valuable. I would say another suggestion, which is that every morning when you wake up, you should think that today when I meet some human being, I will tell him how good he is, really. A very, very pleasant person, very efficient, highly respectable person. That would improve the world. It doesn't cost you very much to be friendly towards your other human beings.
You don't even have to say that. You can just look at someone in the eyes and smile.
Yes.
Oh, even that.
That
yes.
already,
Absolutely.
that does the trick. But I wanted to add to what Sixten, you said, that it doesn't really matter what, I mean, it won't have any influence if we behaved in a certain way. And I would like to remind us all that the norm cycle, I mean, the way in which norms, how they are created, how they sort of diffuse, and how they are internalized. What we need is are these norm entrepreneurs. So we need enough people behaving in a certain way, and then we all of a sudden we see that, okay, now that's also a tipping point. So we see the tipping point that the norm becomes sort of so diffused that it's no longer, I mean, it's taken for granted. So in that sense, I mean, we should not underestimate the our ability to work as or to act as norm entrepreneurs. And in that sense, I would definitely say the same thing, that encourage everyone to live in a sustainable way. Another thing I wanted to add was to participate sort of politically, societally. Civic participation is really important at this at this moment of time. Taking part in associations, in organizations, in all sorts of, what you feel that is important, you can get involved and really make an impact. Unfortunately, what we see in Finland is the decreasing number in those terms. So especially younger generations, they no longer sort of find those ways to act in within the society. So and perhaps they choose social media as their sort of social network. So that's something that we can not emphasize enough, that the people have so much power if we only use it. This is really something that there's no, I mean, if you think of the armies, guns, everything, none of that is as powerful as the people when they start, when they organize and really get together.
Thank you. Sirka, any final words?
If I may add to these very useful suggestions, recommendations, if you favor, whenever you can, renewable energy solutions in your own heating system, in your consumption, favor those products and services that have been produced by using renewable energy. That's also one very concrete recommendation that anyone can do.
Thank you very much. I would like to end the night by thanking all of our guests for this really interesting discussion. Thank you to our audience for being here. Thank you to our photographer, and thank you to our volunteer, Anni. This event has been filmed and will be available on our YouTube channel soon and website, so you can follow us on social media for updates on that. And we wish you all a wonderful holiday season and a lot of hope for the next year, 2026. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Kiitos paljon.